Hello there. Welcome. My name is Dani Henderson. My guest today is the one and only Dan Winter, the great physicist. Welcome, Dan Winter.
And your name being Danny and mine being, when I was little, was Danny. So I think that's a good name.
I think it's actually really special. It's really nice to meet another Danny. Very, very nice.
Well, I think
you
Danielle, somehow the L from On, the one who can make the phase shift from On, Anu, the sun god, you can be, you can be a legend in your own mind if your name is Daniel.
It's so fascinating. I've had this conversation with our mutual friend, Elena Danan, the Galactic Federation of Arts and Mystery. And again, I never assume that anybody watching doesn't know who everybody is. So always go over that background for new people coming to the information all the time, which is the true history of their planet and their solar system. And I've sat with Elena Danan, Dani Henderson, Dan Winter, Dan Willis. If you look, there's a lot of ANs, and sound, Dan sound. And it's just so interesting that we're all kind of coming together, feeling our way together. There are other people as well that all of us know in our group, and people that believe in our hearts that we have knowledge that's going to help humanity on whatever level or whatever kind of system they're in at this time of ascension, which is inevitable. We're all ascending. Now, Dan, I really want to get right into the very beginning of this lifetime for you. I want to know, who was that little guy? Who was little Danny? What was your first memory?
Oh, I was just going to mention that I was not to change the subject, but I was raised in Western New York when I was a little boy, and I was raised with the Iroquois and the Seneca. And the Iroquois and the Seneca tribes, they always talked about Tuatha De Danann, literally Elena's name, meaning people of the gods, Anu, and I even thought about it back then. But your question, I don't know. Actually, I was born at a very early age, I like to say, and my brother was an only child. But that's not actually so helpful. No, actually, I was born. If you know anything about John Steinbeck, I was born just east of Eden. And the grapes of wrath were across the street, and that was the winter of our discontent. So there's 3 John Steinbeck novels right there. And East of Eden, which is the name of the town I was born, was about 2 brothers. And my brother Michael actually he's a very powerful thinker and a banker, and very, it's the Enlil line. And I was the Anu, the Enki side of the family, and the 2 brothers from East of Eden. I mean, it's archetype, man. Ain't it wonderful? But
It is archetype, yeah.
But I went to a little wooden schoolhouse for 8 years, and I was a church organist and choir director when I was in the 4th grade. And oh yeah, there's a few stories to tell.
Oh my goodness, who taught you the organ at such a young age?
Well, that's it. So you see, my mother, Thelma Schleyer, extremely talented, Alsace-Lorraine, and Anne Rice says that the Taltos were tall, red-haired, powerful Amazon Alsatian women, and that's anyway. So, and the story was actually the survivors of Montsegur became the Alsatian. I mean, we can go into the myth, but anyway, the family line Schleyer-Leclerc meant the clear ones, which actually is, Cathar and Montsegur. Anyway, there's lots of ways to weave myth into this, but specifically, my mother was a music teacher and artist, actually very later a very famous, wealthy artist, thelmawinter.com. And my mother taught me piano, organ, guitar, and accordion, and I played Polish polkas, and I was organist and choir directors, and I had a loud soprano voice. And oh, yeah.
Okay. Again, fascinating, because I've never known anything about your childhood, and neither most people watching haven't either. So, are you telling us that you were also taught the piano accordion?
Yeah, well, you see, my mother was teaching music at that. She became an artist later. And when she taught music, she had to teach what the kids wanted to learn. So she taught everything: piano, organ, guitar, accordion, and banjo. And I did quite well on Polish polkas on the accordion for some years. But later I did mostly piano and organ. And in fact, I was classically trained. And today, even I still play Chopin sometimes. And I have even accompanied Valerie in the choirs here in South France. So yeah, and I enjoy music. And actually, supposedly that music, playing Chopin, is what kept me sane at University of Detroit during electrical engineering, supposedly.
Oh my goodness. Wow, that balance in the brain. You know,
Hopefully.
I also trained in piano accordion, again, being the two Danis
Oh,
here.
there you go.
Interesting.
Perfect.
Piano, accordion. So piano, piano accordion, and guitar, and the bagpipes, because we're all Scottish Celts, so we have
Oh,
to. If you're at Henderson, you're going to
nice.
learn the bagpipes whether you like it or not. Because my dad, Big George, who's only 5'8", because he said so. So you're going to do it. So that's amazing, amazing. Well, so your mother, what a beautiful creature of harmony to be able to teach and to be able to gift all that. And so did you strive to try to be the best boy? You know how some children, because their parent is the teacher, was there anything in you striving to be the best boy?
Yeah, psychoanalytically speaking, remember, my mother really came from a long line of geniuses, and there are geniuses in the family, actually. But my father had a near-death experience when he was a teenager, and really, seriously, Valerie will tell you, he had a heart of gold, actually, remembering that near-death experience. So I like to think that I got, pure intention from dear old dad and genius from mother. Did I get the best of both sides? Well, maybe I'm prejudiced, but no, my father, I had the blessing of having a wonderful father. And my father bought my grandfather's electric motor business, S&S Electric, Buffalo, New York. And we rewound every motor in the city of Buffalo because of Nikola Tesla. And I learned three-phase electrical engineering and ran as an electrical engineer that electric motor business for almost 20 years because of my father and what he inherited from my mother's side of the family, which was the electric business. So I was Sparky the motor biz, and I taught electrical inspectors for years, actually.
That is so lovely. That's so lovely. Thank you again. You're building this beautiful picture of your background and how everything kind of weaves in together. And then you mentioned Nikola Tesla. Can you share with us in very layman's terms? We do love the flowery, the poetic, the charismatic Dan Winter that we know and we've come to love. And there's a way also that you have to keep it very clear and simple for us that don't know. Can you explain to us how the Tesla coil, rewinding, etc., came into being and how you would repair the electrical engineering application that came your way?
Well, that's a very useful question. So our family business got its launch because half the country and the city of Buffalo decided they needed to change from 25 cycle to 60 cycle because of Nikola Tesla, who was in Niagara Falls at the time. And now Tesla's choice of 60 cycle actually was hugely unfortunate. It did produce a three-phase motor, 18 and 3600 RPM, which were relatively efficient. But unfortunately, as Tesla did not know, 60 cycle is the voltage at which is the frequency at which the voltage required to stop the heart is lowest. In other words, it's anti-biologic, unfortunately, and unphased conjugate, meaning you cannot make global wireless power ever with 60 cycle. And Tesla didn't quite understand that the Schumann harmonic cascades goes beautifully through 50 cycle, which is how global wireless power worked in the pyramids. And Tesla got the frequency wrong, and he also got the nodal locations wrong to where you could pick up that power. You can only pick up that power where the magnetic lines cross. So there were, and this is called a phase conjugate pump wave. If you take the harmonics of the Schumann cascade, it looks like a caduceus. And that's why the pyramids made and how they made global wireless power. And that's how human bliss works. And that's also how Atlantean fire crystals work. They all work with that, what's called a phase conjugate pump wave, implosive infrasound cascade. And to implode that charge inertia from the transverse to the longitudinal at center, that's what a Tesla coil is, actually. And that's what's behind our Therify.net. Now, I know I went a little fast there, but you get the idea that when you start thinking about these things, you understand there are certain resonances that if you don't couple the planet correctly, where, see, 50 hertz in Europe is the frequency most studied in all cancer literature, most healing. The 60 hertz in USA, you can't even make carbon nano ever in a factory that uses 60 hertz, ever. It ain't possible. Whereas 50 hertz is perfectly phase conjugate, because this is called Planck fire. It's an exact golden ratio multiple of Planck. My book, Planck Fire, phire.com, which shows that charge collapse is the cause of gravity, all 0-point energy and consciousness.
So you refer to Max, is it Max Planck you're referring to there?
The Planck length
Yeah.
is 1.61 times 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, is the musical key signature of every wave that physics has ever measured. It is the musical key signature of the universe, and for a million light years in all directions, it's the same. And that musical key signature, you simply multiply by powers of golden ratio, and you get Planck fire, charge collapse, the radii of hydrogen, Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, precessional, every single negentropic biologic frequencies, including the brainwaves of Bliss and the sacrocranial pump harmonics of Kundalini. You get those frequencies that cause charge collapse. And physics has agreed that charge collapse is a cause of gravity and consciousness, but they didn't know the cause of charge collapse before me and my new book, PlanckFire.com.
Wow, I love it. Own it, Dan Winter. Claim that. Claim that.
Sure.
I love it.
If you'd like, and you can't even begin unless you know why objects fall to the ground. You cannot begin. So that leaves every scientist on this planet out of the conversation.
Yeah, you're right. You're so right. And, you know, it's so interesting watching every kind of scientific body, including NASA, scrabble to try and get to the front. It's like, I'm so sorry. Here's a lollipop. Sit down. You know, Dan and Elena Dan, they're going to take you on a journey along with Dan Willis. So just chill your motors. You were lied to as well. You know, we're all. So I want to get back to Tesla, because what I find really disturbing and sad is, you know, I know between 1897 and 1903, he had already developed drone technology, remote controlled submarines, Wi-Fi, so much that we do use today. Like, he knew to point a microwave up to the ionosphere, have it bounce back around, have the ability to harness the energy, natural energy of this planet, electricity. And then, of course, we know he was trying to run it through his Walden Bridge Tower, the tower that he made.
Wardenclyffe.
Wardenclyffe, that's it. Thank you. And yet you're saying that he didn't seem to understand that at 60 it wasn't going to benefit the planet, and also he got the codes wrong. I just find that so incredibly hard to, you know, get my head around. I've read his papers, apparently, I mean, what do we know? I mean, we're told these are the actual writings.
There's a lot of record. There's lots of record. And he got some things wonderfully right. AC power, three-phase powers. You know, he did absolutely fabulous genius. And so was Einstein. But there were some serious problems. So he was right working with what now is called longitudinal EMF, what was called scalar at the time, for all his beam weapon technology was based on coherent longitudinal. And he was a genius at that and very good. But he didn't understand the perfect way to create longitudinal is charge collapse phase conjugation to Planck. So he didn't get the frequency series right because he didn't understand how the Schumann harmonics cause gravity. So that's when he tried to bounce power around the planet without accurate phase conjugation to Planck. He caused some micro earthquakes, actually. I don't think he understood the relationship to gravity. In fact, you stabilize gravity when you implode charge. That's why the Schumann harmonics are required to stabilize gravity in atmosphere, because they're phase conjugate implosive to Planck. And that was Hermes Tho's design. And Tesla was right about longitudinals, but he didn't understand phase conjugation to Planck. And therefore, he didn't understand really why objects fall to the ground or how to stabilize gravity, actually. The principle was called planet taming in the book 2/3 Arcturian by David Myers and David Percy. Our article about that is goldenmean.info/Babylon. And basically, you have to retune the planet's harmonics to implosively couple. So planetary spin embeds in solar system spin, with embeds in zodiacal spin, and that embedding principle perfected, sometimes called love, actually is the golden ratio phase conjugation required to stabilize gravity and atmosphere. And that tuning, you know, Ningishita, Hermes was an expert, and Tesla did not understand how that caused gravity.
Okay, let's go back here to one of his great inventions. Now, it makes me crazy annoyed at the structures that were in place, because they named his beautiful, let's say, gamma ray. You know, well, let me go back to what I know, because you're the physicist, I am not. What I learned about Tesla is the following. He created a defensive weapon meaning that every country on the planet had access to this defensive weapon, meaning if any enemy came to invade sea, sky, or land, that they could shoot this laser to scare off, prevent war. He came up with what he believed the way to prevent global war. Of course, the arsewipes that run the planet, they couldn't have that. And they also named his invention the death gamma ray gun, which he said he wrote, I am not okay with this. I do not want to be remembered for creating the death gamma ray gun. To your understanding, study, and knowledge, and from your long family history, is that true?
Well, remember, the Russians got the microwave phase conjugate experts from Germany, not the Americans. And they knew how to bounce the microwave off of a submarine periscope, and the Americans didn't. So the Russians got microwave interferometry, and that's the subject of the life of my teacher, Tom Bearden, who wrote the book on it was called the Russian Woodpecker. So that was an introduction to how you use microwave to create coherent longitudinal, which is the only principle behind everything you just talked about. So if you don't understand how microwave interferometry causes coherent longitudinal, then you can't even begin to have the conversation. Practical example, the device that Luke Skywalker holds in his hand is actually a microwave heterodyne cascade that's imploding and projecting a coherent longitudinal beam, actually. And that coherent longitudinal beam can function as a membrane. And the Russians knew a whole lot more about that than the Americans ever did. And that's what Tesla was attempting. And Bearden spent his life on that question. His book on it is called Excalibur Briefing, by the way. So the short answer is that, yes, you interfere microwave in what's called phase conjugation, which is literally the implosion where pine cones kiss noses. And you can make coherent longitudinal microwave, which is probably the deepest, darkest secret of all US national security. And it's how your mind works. So, for example, if you want to measure Kundalini in the microwave, you take the most important molecule in your body, adenosine diphosphate, and there's a teeter-totter, ADP, ATP, and that bandwidth, 1.91 angstroms, is exactly phase conjugate to Planck. So your body is literally imploding longitudinal, and you measure the density of that microwave up your spine. And I was with Bob Dratch, we measured Kundalini, absolutely. It's literally metabolic density. Well, on a planetary scale, when you embed in that, it's called an array. That is the physics of DNA radio, how stargates and portals work. It's introduction to everything interesting about the electrical engineering of the spiritual. And that's called a phase conjugate pump wave. I have some slides, but it's a lot to swallow at once. But so what Tesla got right was that longitudinal was important. What he got wrong was you got to tune it to Planck by golden ratio in order to stabilize phase conjugate, to make it centripetal and negentropic. Otherwise, you don't stabilize gravity and atmosphere, actually.
Okay, now let's go back in a lovely dance, a three-phase dance, a polka, to when you were playing piano accordion. The polka. Okay, now you mentioned Chopin, which is a very advanced, beautiful harmonic on the piano, and you said that that helped you, but I want to go back earlier. I want to go back to the little boy in school. I want to go back to Danny Winter, when he was 7. Do you have memories of 7?
I think I was throwing stones at cars.
Brilliant.
And Sister Mary, actually, it was Sister Mary Albert in first grade, who it was a German school. And I actually studied German in that school in Western New York, just east of Eden, actually, during the winter of our discontent. And I guess they thought I was a genius even then, actually. And I was kind of a musical prodigy, young and whatever. I had what they called later an incredibly analytical mind. So my mind went very fast. And I was known for bringing a whole wagon load of books home from the bookmobile once a week, actually, at that age.
Oh, that's so sweet. So the bookmobile. So why were you learning German? Was there German lineage in your family bloodline?
Well, that's right. So my mother was French German, my father was German, and our village was German. So 1, 2 Polizei, 3, 4 Offiziers, 5, 6 alte Hex, 7, 8 gute Nacht, you know. I can still do the code. And later I lived in Germany for a little while. But anyways, that was the culture at that time. And then, so that was a Catholic small wooden schoolhouse for 8 years in East Eden. And then I went to St. Francis in Athol Springs and studied with the Franciscans for high school. And then I went to the University of Detroit with the Jesuits, and I did my electrical engineering and graduate psychophysiology, actually. So there's a little, and that's how I was hired by IBM at that time.
That is such a body of long-term knowledge and intel that you just dropped there, which is so great. You also just triggered a childhood song in my head. Ein, zwei, fie, fum, I smell blood of an Englishman. Be he dead or be he alive. I'll grind his bones to be he alive or be he dead. I'll grind his bones to make my bread. That is so disturbing, Dan Winter. What say you to
Actually, that song has wonderful physics. Fee, fi, fo, fum. If you understood the physics of smell, Professor Callahan, one of my teachers, Tuning into Nature, was the guy who proved that olfaction is mediated in the infrared. For example, when you teach Steiner kids to visualize a rose well enough, you test whether they succeeded if the room fills with the smell of roses. And we teach the physics, which is the flowering brain implosion, makes the infrared, which is the physics of bliss and smells like roses, to the point that we saw hummingbirds smash into the window to reach the bliss nectar when the women had bliss experience. So fee, fi, fo, fum, actually, the reason you smell the blood of the Englishman, if you know Lawrence Gardner, who said the word Britain, Benetton, means birthplace of the Anunnaki, literally the Anak bloodline. If you see the Jerusalem star map over UK, it's a long story. So to smell the blood of the Englishmen actually meant Rh negative, and it has and their ancestors, if you know who Enlil's mother, Siakar Draco, oh yeah, they were smelling for the blood of the Englishman, absolutely.
Exactly. And again, it's interesting, how when we're little children, now we're adults, now we've had time to read, to study, to get our own proof of what we think is the existence that we're living in. How many of those little things, those triggers just go and you go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was this. I had no idea this was this. And, as we look out there now in the field, there are many what I call different leaders and, people bringing the information, but because they've got a long-term history in and they've had the courage finally to step out. Now, there are probably 60,000 million negative things being said about me because I have a passionate mouth and a light and I bring my light and I'm fine with it. You should see the stories today. They're just dreadful. We got to keep going. We got to keep going. Anyone can look online and find something negative, but then the people looking online have to know they're being manipulated because the truth is out of how amazing we are, how incredibly powerful we are. You said so many things there that I could go back to. You mentioned the Steiner kids. The Steiner kids are a way of teaching, a way of getting a group of children to focus on a specific information that are scientific and are about physics and chemistry, in their own right, to allow this group of children who are lucky enough to be in that group, for example, to have a dedicated following, because then they'll go out into the field and they will spread, they will share. One of the things I'm able to do, and it's quite disturbing even to this day, and I'm in my 50s now, I can literally at times, and it's shocking, look at something and smell it. I have the full smell. It's on television. It's on screen.
Exactly.
I can smell it.
That's exactly.
A lot of people, right? But that's again, to me, that's being the fully realized human. That's what we've come to be, the fully realized human, outside of the vessel, connecting energy to energy with what we're seeing, where there are no barriers and no thing, right?
I love this actually, Valerie has this hypersense of smell. I have the hypersense of hearing. I'm a little bit clairaudient, but the smell, when Callahan determined that the physics of olfaction was mediated in coherent infrared from insect antenna geometries, he actually alluded the cartilage of the tip of the nose is microwave coherent, which is the physics of Kundalini, obviously. So, when they said she was wiggling her nose and that had them worried, actually, that's the good physics of psychokinesis. Are you a good witch or a bad witch? So, but the The physics of smell, the clairsentience of being able to smell indicates that at some point the infrared of the physics of olfaction becomes coherent longitudinal interferometry, meaning you could do that at a distance.
Yeah, yeah. And again, you're listening to someone like you with this information and coming from the childhood expression to the adult that you are now, and all of the experiences on the way. Again, my agenda is always for anyone watching anything I'm involved in is to themselves feel like, oh my God, that happened to me. I remember that, and get triggered in their cellular memory. It's not always stuck in the brain, the files that we file away. It's the feeling, it's the emotion, it's the, oh my goodness, whether or not it's this current life, whether or not it's recordings from past life, is all important to open this up. I want to go back to you, the little guy, pulling his trolley along with all the books, a 7-year-old little genius child. What kind of books would we have seen in that trolley?
Oh, American heroes, Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, King of the Wild Frontier. I was into American heroes. And I realized later that I had flashes of the memory of John Dee. And when John Dee was mature, he was enthralled with the New World. And so I came over here and wanted to know who the American heroes were. Actually, John Dee actually designed the British Empire, and I had flashes. I didn't begin to have those flashes till I was at university at MIT and Harvard, but I knew that I was studying alchemy with John Dee, and John Dee's destiny was the New World, actually. So when they were doing alchemy at that time, they made the purest gold ever measured by the British Royal Society. And I learned the physics, actually, but that's another story.
Wow, wow. Were there any particular kids in school as you were going through school and college, for example, that really influenced you or disturbed you enough for you to go onto a different track of thinking?
Well, Father Reuben, I think, was a black belt karate teacher who was our Latin teacher, teaching us in St. Francis High School. He was teaching us Caesar's Gallic Wars in Latin, and we had to learn, damn it, every single, Gricole, Puelli, sumus estis, sumus estis. So what, at that time, Caesar was a hero to us. Later, it was much later, I realized it's the story of Caesar murdering the Druids. But we didn't know that then, actually. And that was a bit of a turning point, that actually the word Roman means Uru-an, actually, royalty, Uru, of An, the Anunnaki, the Anak. And so that bloodline was actually the problem. So I was influenced in high school by the study of Latin, and I went to school with a lot of very brilliant actually German, highly disciplined. And Chuck became my roommate at university studying physical chemistry at University of Detroit. And he had to learn German in order to be a chemist at that time at University of Detroit, actually. So that was the rigor at that time. And my chemistry teacher was German there, and he was brilliant. And I began to understand a little bit more about what I today call the charge collapse physics of alchemy.
That's so beautiful. You mentioned Latin. Now, we've been programmed to believe and accept that Latin is a dead language. In my opinion, it is a hidden language that the elites use amongst them to create the energetic frequency of the negative spelling that they do, which of course we could take that apart, look at that from a physicist's point of view, if you choose. But what say you about Latin, spoken or not spoken today?
Well, it is the root of all Romance languages. And for example, French, which I'm learning now after many years in France. I should be better at it, but when I studied French in high school, I was more interested in pretty girls and beer at the time. but we came to France when I was in high school, actually not far from where we are now. But the point about languages, and maybe I could take this conversation in a specific direction. So then later, when we learned the physics of what was called Ophanim Enochian, the angel language John Dee and Kelly taught, which I teach, goldenmean.info/Ophanim, which is the plasma physics of the symmetry set, which, for example, is at the root of Greek. And literally, that is the alphabet used to make the movie Stargate, and we teach the physics of why. So the symmetry of the sequence of plasma domains that implode to make a Stargate, the Ophanim Enochian, and Rick Hasson, who produced Stargate, was my my coordinator when I founded Gaia TV, actually. So, and he made the movie Stargate. So, we set up Gaia TV with all the toys that CNN could not afford. I was very blessed at that time.
Amazing, amazing. You mentioned the Greek language as a root language. I mean, I know some Greek, just little, mostly dirty Greek, not sorry. But the Greek alphabet, are you saying they specifically use that symbology and that energy connected to each letter to create the Stargate information that they've then televised?
Well, here's the background. So if you take this self-organizing golden spiral and look at it from the points of view of the 7 arrows of the tetra, the shadows are Hebrew and actually Sanskrit. And I did the first computer animations based on the equation I wrote for that spiral on this torus, goldenmean.info/DNA ring. So once you know the physics of both Hebrew and Sanskrit are simply plasma donut toroid domain symmetry shadows necessary to implode, for example, how you would make the atomic table out of only platonic nests of vortex. So the Greek, a little background here, when John Dee and Kelly first were clairvoyantly scrying with the Ophanim Enochian, they were immersed in Greek. So later we said, oh, and you can see the table, goldenmean.info/Greek, of the Greek letters and the Ophanim letters, and it's obvious the angel alphabet is, well, I went to Greece to teach that in Athens, and they would prefer to shoot you rather than have you tell them there's something older than Greek. You could be dead if you say that in Greece.
Right, yes, they are a fierce lot. Oh, wow. So you taught it in Athens.
Oh, I taught in every major city in Europe and Australia, USA. For 30 years, we taught in every city. Yeah, but
wow.
anyway, so the point is that actually all alphabets, their only significance truly is the symmetry sequences necessary to nest plasma domains. For example, how you make chemistry, how you make a golem. If you're a rabbi, you fill your brain with one Hebrew letter at a time, and your optical cortex then has a smoke ring at a particular tilt. And then you nest those donuts. That's called making a golem, but it's also the physics of chemistry. So by angling the toroidal nests of charge at correct symmetry sequences, that's the origin of really all alphabets. That's the physics of psychokinesis itself. For example, when you do the Ophanim Enochian rituals and you invoke the names of God, and it literally blows the door off the room. We did that in Torino, and we know why the air pressure changes. But it's simply because you're making implosion.
So we could say to people, go study the Greek alphabet, go study the angelic alphabet, whatever. You can see that it isn't manipulated online by the whatever we want, the deletes. Everything is interfered with. Everything pure is tampered with if it's online, sadly. And I know in some books too, but so many people, Dan, they're on a journey, and also it's also because of you, because of the information that you put out. If they're not going to get it on a galactic level or a psychological level or an emotional level, they're going to get it on a scientific physics level, because that's how their brain has been programmed to work. So you have lent so much into the field at this time of ascension, at this time of awakening. And I know there are many people grateful. You're a delight to look at, you're a delight to listen to. There's many things that you say without saying in the spaces in between your words. There's this inherent joy, childlike, which is why I wanted to talk more about your childhood, this inherent joyful frequency that comes from you, which you can't hold that, you can't hide that. Now, a couple of things I want to go back to. You mentioned Sanskrit. Now, those that don't know, Sanskrit is a really ancient language. I say it's one of the root languages. Some would say it was before Latin was transcribed. What could you share with us on your knowledge of Sanskrit?
Well, the graphics are at goldenmean.info/DNA ring. So once you see the shadows of the spiral on the torus indexed by tetra, and those shadows are the Hebrew Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, and then you take those same letter forms, and in Hebrew, they take the tagan and the crownlet to index the relative point of view with respect to the tetra cube. So the tagan and crownlet on the Hebrew letters index your perspective with respect to tetra cube, which is the symmetry of Hebrew, and by the way, also Sumerian. Well, now, if you take the tagan and crownlet off and put the vertical and horizontal bar used for Sanskrit, the same letters are Sanskrit. And the graphics are all there. goldenmean.info/DNA ring. I could pick out the slides here, but it's simple. These are all simply symmetry indexes for nesting donuts tetracubically. And that is the physics of creation, because that's the physics of phase conjugation, which is to say how to implode vortex. And
also the building blocks of matter.
If your chemistry teacher was doing a respectable job, he would have told you that the only symmetry in chemistry, the SPDF suborbitals, are the S is torus, the pi is tetracubic, and the DF are dodecaecosa. And now you're done. You've made the whole atomic table. So the pi suborbital is tetracubic and the DF suborbital is dodecaecosa, pure phase conjugate implosion. So you cannot even begin to study chemistry unless you realize that both the electron shells and the hadrons of the nucleus are only specifically a platonic nest and nothing else. And Kepler also got that correct, saying planetary orbitals had to be a platonic nest. He didn't know why. We now know, because that's how you do charge collapse. And that is the only way to stabilize gravity, which is why golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics. It is because it's the only way to stabilize gravity in atmosphere and create negentropy. And when you nest platonic solids, this is called the Star Mother kit, goldenmean.info/kit. The only ratio you generate is golden ratio outside the tetracube, which is square root of 2. So it's about charge collapse. Charge collapse is the summary. The word chem in alchemy means access to the black hole charge collapse. And that's pure chemistry, pure alchemy, pure fusion, pure implosion. And that's the name for ancient Egypt because it was alchemic.
Alchemic. I don't know how you feel about this. I believe this to be truth because I've proven it for my very own self. Over the years, the original beautiful periodic table that gave us all of the symbology of every single alchemical chemistry symbol, physics symbol, there are elements removed from the original periodic table. What say you to that?
Maybe, is it okay if I do a quick little screen share? Is this a...
Of course.
We have some great pictures though. So if you go to goldenmean.info/creation, you see the slideshow there. But so here is the, this is the electron shell geometry, SPDF, as seen clairvoyantly, which is basically platonic. And then, oops. And this is the nuclear hadron symmetry. You quite see it here, zoom in. Tetracube octaecosa. So this is the geometry of all the protons and neutrons right there, platonic charge collapse. And this is the geometry of all the electrons, simply platonic nesting. So your chemistry teacher forgot to tell you one important thing, that the electrons and the nucleus are simply a platonic nest only, nothing more, nothing less. And that enables the charge collapse, which defines gravity, actually. So that's all at goldenmean.info/creation. So the point being that later, if you want to study alchemy, which is only about charge collapse, you learn how to catalyze the collapse of charge between electron shells, the physics of fusion. It's called non-destructive charge collapse or isotope transition. And we have the equations, fusion physics is quite elegantly conjugate charge collapse again, which is why it's so affected by mind.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that during your education that there was an element of Jesuits running.
Oh yeah, big time.
Some information about the Jesuits, please.
Well, University of Detroit is a Jesuit university, and I studied in a monastery garden, interdisciplinary, everything with the Jesuits, absolutely. And we had a Jesuit. It's Father Tom Porter, who was the dean at the time and a good friend. And emotionally, the Jesuits were in trouble, I would say, actually. Socially, they really couldn't have the experience of touch, I don't think. And many of them left the order eventually. But the discipline of the Jesuits to study interdisciplinary everything and learn, they knew they were one of the leading engineering universities in the world at the time, which is why I went there. I had scholarship offers at MIT and a bunch of other universities, but I went to University of Detroit because the Jesuits, in fact, did understand we were studying phenomenology of perception while we studied electrical engineering with the Jesuits. And I know there are rumors about Ignatius Loyola and control of whatever. And I did not encounter that. I encountered brilliance, I have to say. And so I tend to regard some of the conspiracy theories about the Jesuits as overblown, actually. But I know that at earlier times, the Dominicans, for example, were deeply involved in the Inquisition. And I know much of that was bad news. And I know I had some incarnations then. So I won't I won't claim innocence here at all.
Well, it's good that you raised the point, because for me, it's like there's infiltration in the Jesuit societies and the Catholic societies and the Freemasons, Masonics. There's always beauty and grace and goodness. And then they're infiltrated because they're very, very powerful organizations. So you've got the good guys at the front, and you've got the dark ones at the back, operating mechanically from behind the scenes. Definitely interesting times. May I ask you, you mentioned earlier the author Anne Rice. Now, Anne Rice also has another name. She wrote some, in my opinion, deeply disturbing stories. Sleeping Beauty. Did you ever read any of those?
I read most of her Lestat Vampire Chronicles, and I found some useful physics. Later in her life, she became a fundamentalist Christian, and really, I think, kind of lost it. But intuitively, when she named the ancestor of all vampires, Enkil, literally with frozen crystallized blood, I think that is a relatively good description of the largest plasma parasite at that time in the solar system, the Grim Reaper, who was mostly Enlil's ghost, I believe, actually. So Anne Rice, I think, got a few things correct. So when she wrote about the Taltos, tall red-haired women from Alsace, and I saw my ancestors there. So I saw some very useful intuitions, actually. But the notion of the vampire can get back to an important lesson about astral hygiene. And actually today I came prepared to talk a little bit more about astral hygiene, specifically when I worked with Bentov, who was the arch nemesis of Puharich, whom I also knew, Andrei Puharich. I knew him very well. And so the story of Puharich's astral hygiene, when he introduced Phyllis Schlemmer to Enki, actually, I was there. And that is a conversation that we could have. And the conversation rotates around the issue of astral hygiene, which is, I think, what you bring up. Also, my relationship with Marcel Vogel at that time, and Tom Bearden.
Okay, blowing my mind, Dan Winter. I need to slow you down a little bit, because you've just dropped some big ass names there. Okay, Phyllis Schlemmer, who was the channel for the book The Only Planet of Choice, for example. Okay, may you just take your time and imagine you're talking to me, and imagine I'm 8 years old, so that you can really come down to my 8-year-old level, so we can have more and more people understand your brilliance. So just take it away, whatever slides you want to share, and don't miss out on any of those stories.
Well, one of the things that I was blessed with when I was young, they called me the Forrest Gump of the physics of consciousness generation, is because I was taught by, Bill Tiller, Andrei Puharich, Ben Bentov, Marcel Vogel, Arthur Young. These were all directly my teachers. I knew all of them very well. Tom Bearden, Chris Bird. These were all people I hung out with daily, actually. And so I was there when Phyllis Schlemmer learned from Andrei Puharich, who was called at that time Atum, Tom, whom they later knew was Enki Ea, actually. So I was there, and the drama of that moment had to do with the fact that my other teacher at that time, Ben Bentov, who wrote the book on the biomechanics of Kundalini, I lived with him. I operated the polygraph in his lab, where we measured the physics of Kundalini and did the documentary goldenmean.info/Kundalini. I may be the world's leading teacher on the physics of Kundalini, thanks to Bentov. Point being, Bentov and Puharich were on the opposite sides of the Arab-Israeli war. And while Puharich is there saying, well, the airline tickets fell from the ceiling and there's miracles happening, and Bentov is saying, Puharich, you got low-grade spooks problem. actually. So that this was definitely a question of astral hygiene. And later, when Puharich died on the porch of the Reynolds Foundation, it was clear that he was infested with astral hygiene problems, hugely, actually. Horrible astral hygiene, horribly obese, as was Puharich, Bearden, Vogel, Bird. Incredibly bad astral hygiene, incredibly obese, and a serious issue that needs to be studied, which is astral hygiene 101, actually. And Puharich functionally did not have a clue, actually, what astral hygiene even was. Because at that time, they thought, oh, if some entities are talking to me, they've got to be genius, they've got to be wonderful. But actually, at that time, you needed discrimination. And that was a lesson Bentov was teaching, and Puharich did not get. Now, at the same time, the other side of that physics to be Andrei Puharich's background, he had an invention which taught you how to use a piezo oscillator attached to the bone so that deaf people could hear. Now, this was his background, but what few people know is that is the physics of clairaudience and why Enki Tom Atun made the first phone call to Puharich. People don't understand why Puharich got the first phone call. Well, that's why. We have all the graphics for that. And that was in my lecture from tours here. But the point being, so then it was much, much later that Puharich realized that this was, they called himself Tom, which was Atun. Remember Atun and Atum and Amun or Enki versus Enlil in the Egyptian story, although Elena may rightly say that that's also partially the Marduk story, but either way, it's basically Enki, Enlil, Atum, Amun. And so Atun at that time, meaning sun god, was the lineage of Enki. And that's how Enki introduced himself to Andrei Puharich and where Phyllis Schlemmer learned, and that later became how Star Trek was written.
Yeah. It's just so incredible. As you say, Star Trek was written out of that because Gene Roddenberry attended some of those channelings.
At Schlemmer's, yes.
You're dropping all these names of real people that you sat with. So what we're doing here is we're mapping an age, a generation of people who were always going to come forth with story, with science, with chemistry, with physics. And if we go back, we can go back to the Renaissance period where we have Mozart, or, the auditory and then the physical. So we have these different levels of time on our planet that drop in as times of genius where groups of people come together. I remember going to the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. It's my favorite museum. And walking around Cézanne, Degas, Monet, Manet, Renoir, Van Gogh's, in America they say Van Gogh, in England or Britain we call it, or Europe, Van Gogh, his self-portrait, and there were no barriers. There were no barriers. There were no like out of control, like TSA mentality security people like you see a lot in America, especially in California. I was just there, I'm like, oh my God, chill out. Like have a cheesy what's it, get a packet of something and sit your ass down. Oh my God. But what you're sharing with us, it just brings me so much joy and delight, because we're delving into Dan the man and then learning that all of these influences you've had, and of course you've raised this in other interviews and broadcasts, but to get a collapse of it, so people get a better understanding of you, because I know you to be one of the most important voices in this moment of ascension, that even if, like you say, Tesla, not everyone gets everything right. I've made errors in my journey too, but at least we've got a port where we can anchor and go, right, let's see what Dan Winter says about this. Because not only if, the different people who've influenced your life, that you've physically met, that you've sat and you've watched and you've listened to. Now, there were many things, Gene Roddenberry, Phyllis Schlemmer, in that book that came out, there were some elements of Atlantis. One of the things that was dropped in that book was that some people said the dolphins were actually the good humans that were given a choice. You either go down with the Atlantean civilization or you can you can become, you know, another species, live that way, have the memories stored, continue memories that way. That was one thinking. Another was some of the experiments that did happen in various parts of Atlantis, because it was thousands of miles wide and long, as we know, that some people did experiments like they do today, cloning, mixing fish DNA with human DNA. And some people say that is how the dolphins were created. So it's a bit of a mishmash and we're getting more and more clear. But what do you think about some of those elements?
Well, I think it would be good to be a lot more specific. So Atlantis, originally called Thule, after Tehuti, who is Thoth Hermes, which is Enki's partner, science officer, Ningishida. There, if you see the circular concentric water land rings, which are Atlantis, now the South Pole, you realize it's actually a capacitor and designed to be implosive, which is what's behind what's later called the Atlantean fire crystal. Edgar Casey called it Tuoai stone. And the Tuoai stone was misused to enslave people, it's true. But the physics behind the fire crystal Tuoai stone is highly instructive for the Storal to the Mori today about astral hygiene. So I first started working on the physics of the Atlantean fire crystal. If you see the center of that Elena's favorite starship, it's a crystal that goes up the center. I have a slide, and there's a pump wave at the top. Well, the pump wave that's delivered into that crystal is called a phase conjugate pump wave. It's the same as the caduceus of the Schumann cascade. And for example, in the crystal that Marcel used to control the plant at a distance, I was there in Toronto actually, and it was only when Marcel was able to make the low frequency cascade of his own spine liquid pump, the infrasound conjugate pump wave of your spine liquid, actually the only physics of Kundalini and Bliss. And if your spine liquid is pumping, it's clinically impossible to be depressed. Well, that low frequency infrasound is the only thing that can make a hex piezo quartz make a longitudinal and therefore healing. And actually, Marcel was sweating up a storm. He knew that that crystal wasn't going to affect that plant. He learned from Cleve Baxter, who was also a good friend, Secret Life of Plants. And my friend Chris Bird later wrote the book, Secret Life of Plants, with Cleve Baxter based on that work. Point being that since I was a systems analyst with IBM also at that time, along with Marcel, I interviewed him in depth because my partner, Louis Acker, who kind of wrote the book on the physics of Atlantean fire crystals, we had meetings with it's called Theory and Design of Quartz Crystal Oscillators, Virgil Bottom, a team that was studying the physics of the Atlantean fire crystal, actually. And today, that would be called Koski Frost. It's a crystal which famously made 800 times its own weight in gravity with a phase conjugate pump wave. And that's what's behind what was later called warp propulsion. Point being that if you can't create that pump wave, the quartz crystal is pure hex and is never going to heal anybody. So I see, again, Vogel, he was intuitively beautiful and made beautiful crystals. But the critical question, which I insisted he didn't know, which was how to align the facet planes with the molecular planes. And the only way to do that is you have to know that the z-axis of the quartz is birefringent, which rotates the plane of polarized light, which is the only way then to align the internal molecular planes with the cut facet planes. And the only way you could then accurately make a fire crystal, actually. Point being, then you could use that pump wave to create the microwave coherence, which would, mind control, yes. Gravity control, absolutely. Warp propulsion. The warp propulsion is literally the implosion because the helix in the quartz, or barium, strontium, titanate, or what later was called the dilithium crystals in Star Wars. It's a piezo helix. The helix is pumped with a phase conjugate implosive pump wave, and out that pine cone of implosion comes the longitudinal EMF, which is the only definition of a gravity wave. So there's a lot of astral hygiene there, but understanding what was the Atlantean fire crystal is essential to understand the astral hygiene issues at the time. And when Atlantis was destroyed, it was very simple. Enlil wanted to wipe out his brother. That's the only thing that whole story was about. So they had the asteroid that was misdirected and the gravity wave that caused the flood. And it was Enlil wiping out Enki. That's all. That's the summary of the story, actually.
You know what's so incredible as well? I cannot believe that the greatest scholars in my mind of this time are people like you, Elena Danan, Alex Collier, Jean-Charles Mayan, Tony Rodriguez. Let's say more on the galactic history of our planet and our solar system. And there's only one Muppet, one single boy out there fighting for Enlil. I'm like, dude, look over here, boy. Look at all these great scholars, twice your age, lived twice as long, and haven't plagiarized information into a badly written book. It's just so incredible to me. But it also gives me such peace in my heart when I, one by one, as many others watching this, we come to discover these individual people that sit in front of us and espouse information. And if each one of us took time to listen, to feel, do I resonate? Can I connect to that? You know, it's really, really important. And then those of us who have some pain or whatever in the body, we're allowing that pain to heal as we're coming into the, you know, the top, whatever word you want to call the access point in our lives. So I want to go back to your father for a minute. When you talked about your dad, so you, right there as well, your whole demeanor shifted. Now that tells me, without using verbal language, that you really loved your dad. And there's an energetic connection that you have to this beautiful man. Could you share with us, what are the gifts that your father left in you?
You know, at the time when he told me about his near-death experience.
Oh, no, you froze. Sorry, go back. You froze, my love. Sorry.
No, at the time when he told me about his near-death experience as a teenager, I didn't realize that people coming back from near-death experiences often reinvented their lives. I didn't realize till much later that that's how he got that beautiful sense of perspective for his whole life, actually, because he went through death, absolutely, when he was young. And so my father, not only was he religious and spiritual, but everybody loved him. He was a he was a sweetheart. He ran the family business. And so he empowered me. I had a farm, an electric vehicle, 3 tractors, and Sufi conferences in my farm. And my father gave me everything. He ran the family business, but I was the technical director of the family business. And then when I wanted to go off and go to the Gurdjieff school, and then later I wanted to go off and found a community in North Carolina, my father helped me and set me free and empowered me. And I mean, you know, and Valerie loved him too. I mean, yeah, dear old dad. Eugene, his name is Eugene, which is the father of the Gene. My mother's name is Thelma, the Elma. So, you know, everyone imagines themselves to be archetype. But yeah, you know, if you had some pure intention in the family, it's a beautiful, inspiring thing for sure. And I'm grateful for that.
So lovely. Again, you know, your generation, you're only just a little bit older than me, but you know how the parent expects the child to continue the family business. From what you're sharing, there was none of that. Now, you mentioned the Sufis. I know this is something dear to you. I know there's a lot of people that yet haven't come across the Sufis and that whole you know, history, reality. Can you share with us your Sufi experience, please?
Well, when I was with Bucky Fuller in Florence, Italy, Pir Vilayat Khan was with us, and he tried to teach physics. He did a terrible job, but I ended up meeting the founder of the Sufi healing order, Saul Baradowski, and we had the National Sufi Healing conferences at my farm for quite a few years, actually, and Sufi sacred dance. And later, when I became active at the Gurdjieff School in West Virginia and started having my first Kundalini experiences, it was with the Sufi teachers. I even mentioned that in the thing I did last week with Elena, when we were talking about the science of love. It was the Sufis who said, only love bends the light, therefore only love creates. What they meant was the embedding that creates centripetal force of love, really perfect embedding, the ability to achieve compassion, is what is the origin of implosion, and therefore the only truly creative force, which is, as Enki taught, that connects you to source at the center. But the other thing I learned from the Sufis during the Sufi dance, if I may say, which leads perfectly to the conversation we wanted to have about astral hygiene, they said, well, to begin the Sufi dance, first you must put your attention in your baby finger, and if your attention can make your baby finger tingle, then you're ready to do Sufi dance, because you're recognizing the electrical force of your attention. And then they said, then take that attention and track it from your center of gravity to the Earth's center of gravity to the sun's center of gravity, like a series of slingshots. And later, when you study the physics of gravity itself, you understand the relationship. That center of gravity is a center of attention because it's literally the center of implosion. It's like Castaneda Tensegrity saying, if you can't find the place of power in a room, the place of power in a room is not only the source of the acoustic echo, it's the source of the electrical echo. And the perfect electrical echo is the only name for immortality, which is why, for example, in Meetings with Remarkable Men, the Sufi saint is assigned by who knows how to make an echo. It's literally implosion. So that ability to track center of gravity with your attention is the introduction to tornado steering and all the things we've been doing in my recordings with Elena Dan lately. And that all came from the Sufis.
That's so beautiful. So again, give us a bit of history on the Sufis and the fact that this dancing that they do, this meditative state, you've just anchored in all of the needed parts to make that actually happen. But let's again not assume that people know what Sufi is. So can you give us the background history and what the Sufi dancing is, please?
Well, it was said the Essene origins of Christianity was the Essenes. The esoteric origins of the Muslim was the Sufis. That's the saying. But the Sufis, that they were focused on bliss practice. And I would give one example. And this, again, is from my training at the Gurdjieff School in West Virginia, Claymont.org, where I first had Kundalini, actually, that if the Sufi student is doing the dervish turn, the physics is instructive that you're doing the Sufi turn. I have slides of this, but we don't need them right now. But actually, if the student is able to do the spin for the teacher, and as they spin, their center of attention is focused in such a way that they do not get dizzy. So electrical engineers really need to understand why it is that if you're doing a Sufi turn, a Sufi spin, that if in fact, if you don't get dizzy, that's proof of your pure intention. That is new electrical information. that the reason that if you're able to keep your attention at the center, that's the beginning of tornado steering and all centripetal forces. They even use this to teach time travel in physics magazines, Sufi turning. I have slides, but anyway, so Sufi turning is a very profound thing.
That's lovely. You mentioned the dervishes also, because again, as we're going through and learning the history of our planet, it's important that we all anchor in, find the root beginnings of things, but also what different things are called. The twirling dervishes, you just connected to the Sufis. And these are different kinds of meditational dances where mostly men. I remember when Elena was in Turkey last year, she was sending us, girlfriends and boyfriends of hers, pictures and video. And there was a dance. It was a group of twirling dervishes, or they may have been called Sufis. I don't remember, but I know they're very, very similar, and like you said, it's grounding in that gravitational pull connected to the sun, the core of the earth, the center of self, it's just so beautiful. I love how you're explaining this. And again, because more kind of awakening that we get to give people. I've been making the notes the whole time. Go ahead.
They call it a whirling dervish. And actually they use this to teach the physics of time because, electrical people understand time is only a name for relative spin rate. So when they said that all time is present or no time is present, all they mean is the spins are coupled at the centripetal center. So the more rotations that can be superposed at one point, the only definition of going to the next dimension. And you learn that in the Sufi turn, the whirling dervishes, actually. So there's a lot of physics journals that actually talk about whirling dervishes for that reason. My teacher at that time, incidentally, was Rashad Field, the Sufi who wrote The Last Barrier. And their Sufi school is still active in central Spain here with our friend Georg. They have a whole village that teaches Sufi dancing, actually. So the summary here is that, as we've said many times, that if you have a way to teach a bliss practice to your young people, that is the only definition of culture. Remember, it isn't about the shoe polish and the wine. No, because access to a bliss experience for your young people is going to determine not only if they get an immune system, harmonic inclusiveness defines vitality, but it's going to determine if they take memory through death.
Wow, that's a very ponderous, stop me in my tracks thought there. I'm going to step back a little bit with you in terms of when you went from school and you were already noted to be a little boy who was very clever and very engaged in information and learning and reading, and you were obsessed somewhat with the heroes, and then you end up literally in your generation, you end up with several heroes and leaders in the
lucky.
Right. Yeah. Well, I have a theory on that. I don't think it was luck. I'm going back to the Renaissance painters, to the Mozart, the Bach and Chopin, who we'll come to, and then you guys, the scientists, because again, you're right on the heels of Nikola Tesla in terms of chronological time on this planet, where it was time for certain informations and intels to anchor in for people to grasp them and then move forward and spread, which of course has always tried to be blocked. Every level's tried to be blocked. But my God, are we all putting it all together right now? You mentioned that when you were in college, university, that at times of stress and anxiety for you, you would defer to playing Chopin. And for those that don't know Chopin, it's spelled like Chopin, Chopin, because it's not fair again to assume, because you're living in France, I'm from Britain, we've all got different dialects in our heads. So could you share with us how you came across Chopin, what you would play, and what it would physically, chemically do to you?
Yeah, well, the Chopin waltz, the 3/4 time, and I even knew that at the time, that the waltz is the rhythm of the heart, literally. I was doing power spectrum of EKG, which is when I invented the word heart coherence. realheartcoherence.com, I'm credited in the literature with inventing the term heart coherence. And in a spectrum analysis of the EKG, you will see lub dub, the waltz is 3/4 time. That's the heart, absolutely, which is what the fetus hears in the womb. It's literally a waltz. So I was playing Chopin waltzes with really quite great passion at the time. But I have to confess, I was going to University of Detroit, but across the street from where I was staying was the girls' school at Mercy College, and they had the good pianos. So there's another whole layer to that story, which we could
Dan, you are a cheeky one. You are a cheeky one. So the 3/4 time again in waltz is also, if you speed up a lot, it's the polka and 1 2 3 and 1 2 3 and 1 2 3, which is what you were playing on the piano accordion, right?
Well,
so we can.
Polish weddings were the dominant feature of St. Mary's Church in East Eden, New York. And I was the church organist, but I was also in charge of some weddings. And of course, Polish polkas were. Yeah. I had fast fingers, and I learned from a Polish teacher, the organ, actually. And later we had amazing experiences in Poland teaching many of these things about sacred geometry, and you can see those stories at goldenmean.info/Polish. So I have a big connection there as well. Actually, we have websites in about 8 languages.
That's so great. There's just so much more information here that people get to pull on you and read more of your work and, look at where you pulled it from. Getting the story from the actual person is just so crucial at this time.
We have goldenmean.info/Italian. I have 3 books out in Italian. We have goldenmean.info/German, and we did a lot of lectures in Brazil and Portuguese. And our French website is goldenmean.info/French. So, and we have, dozens of years in lecturing in all these countries, actually.
It's so wonderful. So we're going to slow down and say Golden Mean, the overall website that people can get that incorporates speaking in Portuguese, Spanish, French.
Yeah, goldenmean.info, goldenmean.info/French, German, Italian, Dutch. We're in many languages.
Goldenmean.info. Those people who may have studied some mathematics, for example, in physics, may have come across, you know, the golden mean ratio, the Mandelbrot set, the Julius set. Can you, I know it's such a lot to ask you, but again, just to help people really anchor in.
Yes.
Could you
That's the right
give
question.
us a synopsis of what the golden mean is?
That's right. You know, people knew for many centuries that the golden mean ratio, 0.618, pretty much defined beauty. But physicists did not understand at all until we published the equations that proved that golden mean ratio is the generalized solution to constructive wave interference. That is new information. Therefore, golden mean ratio is the generalized solution to compression. The solution to compression is the solution to almost any problem you can name: urban design, history of computing, alchemy, implosion, fusion, how to get through death. All of those questions are only the solution to compression. So when you learn newly that golden mean ratio is the generalized solution to wave compression, why that is therefore the solution to fractality. The Mandelbrot set is literally a picture of golden ratio harmonics. So many physicists already knew that fractality causes gravity because they knew Einstein said infinite non-destructive compression is the solution, but never could figure out how compression could be non-destructive until I wrote the book, PlanckFire.com, publishing the solution to compression, therefore the solution to wave collapse, therefore the cause of consciousness and gravity and all negentropy. So golden ratio, there is no question more important in wave mechanics. And I ask any scientist out there to look at my new equation: Planck times powers of golden ratio equals the radii of hydrogen. That is a smoking gun. Golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics. This is a smoking gun. Golden ratio is the solution to implosion and the reason gravity exists. Because when the waves recursively heterodyne by golden ratio, they add and multiply recursively constructively, not just the wavelength, but the phase velocity. And that turns compression into acceleration, heterodyning of phase velocities. The experience of compression generates the experience of charge acceleration towards center. And in physics, that charge acceleration towards center caused by golden ratio fractality is named the gravity. So now you, unlike Einstein, Stephen Hawking, and NASA, now know why objects fall to the ground.
Which you said is a fundamental value and question that every single person with a pulse should be asking.
It's the only reason gravity exists. It's the only reason life exists. It's the only reason consciousness exists, because that force is centripetal. As the plasma accelerates toward that center, all the charge waves imploding toward that center, as they pass through that center of phase conjugate fractal implosion, the charge waves emerge only those who are sorted in phase. That is called the origin of all negentropy, the cause of life, the cause of perception. For example, if you interview a child who just learned to see without their eyes, blindfolded, they go into a bliss state, the same brain waves that John Charles Moyen made, and we measure this and teach this, flameinmind.com/outer vision. If you interview that child, they said, oh, when I close my eyes, I'm in bliss, I saw a little vortex, a tube, appear inside my head. And when they evolve the inner muscles to squeeze that vortex to a point, that plasma vortex becomes an eyeball. That is the only definition of consciousness. And that's the only thing you can take with you outside your body: lucid dreaming, remote viewing, astral travel, and the only way through death.
You know, just to share very quickly, years ago, so I'm a natural clairvoyant. I woke up, you know, was born seeing, I remember my birth, blah, blah, blah. Lots of people do. It doesn't make me special. So I've always been aware of being able to see. I see things people say they can't see, and I question that too. I think the religion comes in and blocks them when they stop seeing, but it's natural for us as becoming fully realized humans, which I believe is our role, fully realized humans in this physical vessel. Damn, I was going to tell you this. So years ago, a director called me and said, right, what makes you what makes you special? How can you say you're clairvoyant, clairsentient? Clairsentience we know is feeling, clairaudience is hearing, clairvoyance is seeing. And I said, I don't know what makes me stand out. I think if you were to blindfold me and take me around London, I'll be able to tell you where I am. I don't even know where that thought came from. It certainly wasn't mine, right? So there I am in a taxi, black cab, going around London blindfold, not having a clue where I'm going, a clue where I'm at. I assumed that when I was blindfold, all my senses would be peaked and out here. And I would be feeling and searching, looking through my third eye. It was the opposite, Dan. What I learned was when my visuals were taken away and I'm under pressure and stress to perform, to read the room or the place or the theater without knowing I'm in a theater, knowing anything. When I was blindfold, I found myself going inside and it was very quiet in there. Very, very
Nice.
quiet. I was able to tell people where I was able to give them history as the timelines played out, as I, with my piezoelectricity was able to capture, the frequencies that created stories and memories from the past, and I was able to verbally explain them. But it was very, very interesting. As you mentioned, the blind, the covering, the senses.
Beautiful.
I think
it's good.
all play with it.
And it would be nice to talk about the physics a bit more, for example, as an extension of what's called echolocation. Your orientation with what's called longitudinal interferometry are the wave nodes of the longitudinal compressional waves nodes. They make a picture like this. For example, the only reason telepathy is only possible at Earth magnetic grid cross line points for that reason. So, for example, we would say your ability to do what you just described would improve when you're at magnetic line cross points, and we know why. That ability would also improve at sunrise and sunset, and we know why. And ability to do remote healing, ability to do Agnihotra, they all depend on your relative position with respect to those longitudinal coherent nodes, which are the only mechanism of gravity waves, only mechanism of action at a distance, and the only mechanism of ancestral memory. So, for example, when those same kids start seeing without their eyes, having gone into that trance bliss, almost invariably, they begin seeing their ancestors, which freaks out the parents in the West. In the East, they take it, they understand. But the point is, ancestral memory lives in the wave nodes of that compressional array. And that is a beautiful introduction to the physics of successful death, which is that compression is required to get in there. So if a death is in a peaceful, centripetal, sacred space, then literally successful death is literally a black hole. Why you need to see your whole life compressed in the seconds before. It is a compression event, which is why the death visions are electrically contagious, as Ray Moody proved. So the physics of death, the Heinrich Clouvet form, constant lattice, cobweb tunnel spiral, that whole bit. goldenmean.info/immortality, you'll see the pictures. So the ability to die well depends on the compression to enter that array. Remember, as we said many times, you inhabit an array now. It's called the spark gap, the sparks of your synapses. At death and lucid dream and remote view, you simply inhabit a larger array, which are those coherent longitudinal nodes. That means, Stonehenge and sacred sites and magnetic lines are a wonderful place to die. And electrosmog and most hospitals are literally hell to die in because you can't jump off into the array very well. I was at the top of the North Island in New Zealand, and I know exactly where the Maoris go to die, and I know why.
Yes, that is so beautiful. And again, gosh, we could just go for hours and hours. You're so fascinating. I want to come back to something here. Now, in the space industry, of which I worked in for quite some time, I had my own space industry. I recruited the best scientists and brilliant minds, in the world, for a specific company in England and the UK. Now, in there, we learned the specifics, field programmable gate array, FPGA or ASICs, or applied specific integrated circuits. Now, you mentioned gate array, and that obviously triggers my mind back to when I was in the space industry. Could you explain, in layman's terms, again, remember I'm 8, because you're so brilliant, that how we can connect to understanding what the array is, or the gate array is, per human to energy field?
In conventional electronics, when they refer to a gated array, they're only referring to a digital gated array, which is strictly linear, which means only cubic, only. That's the only kind of array they know how to think about. What they don't know is that the compression node, sometimes called scalar correctly, or longitudinal EMF, when they bounce around, they bounce to the longitudinal nodes, which are a 3D fractal. The Earth grid looks like this. So does DNA, Earth grid, and zodiac, and hydrogen. So that array, which is measured and proven, the only place you have commercially valuable telepathy, the only place birth and death are successful, and the only radio for ancestor memory, and the only place you can install a labyrinth, cathedral, therify successfully, because you can make phone calls to the array. This is why Jean-Charles, when he first teleported, he had to go to the seacoast. It was a longitudinal node. So these compressional sites enable access to the array. And this is the beginning of understanding. So when you find your place of power in the node of that array and you close your eyes, then you can see the whole array from within, just like you were seeing London. So it's the ability to be centripetal in that array that actually is the physics of compassion and the centripetal force that allows you to feel what was outside and turn inside out and feel it inside.
That's brilliant, brilliant. Again, just for a moment, in terms of fear energy or love energy, those frequencies stay and they hold, and we know we can record them. Those of us that have clairsentience can feel them. And when I was doing that blindfold day, I was taken to, it used to be called Virgin Radio, then it was called Absolute Radio, but they took me downstairs into this radio station. And when I got out of the taxi blindfold, in my mind's eye, I could see horses, black horses, funeral horses, pulling coffins along, right? And that was the first thing that I told the guy who was guiding me, because I'm blindfold. We go downstairs and I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I'm in hell. I'm going to collapse. And what I was seeing was plague pits. And so they took me to a place called Golden Square in London, where in 1 month measurement of time, there were 4,000 infected bodies from the bubonic plague thrown down there under the Piccadilly Circus underground line. And that's what I was picking up, and that's what I was seeing. So it's just incredible how the nodal points of sacrifice, points of trauma, right? All these energetic fields that play in together that allow us to read.
And your sensitivity to these things is beautiful. It's powerful. It's important. It's necessary. But it's also necessary that we teach the physics. So, for example, where you have a lot of angry, dizzy ghosts in one place, we now understand the physics of releasing them. So, for example, the therify plasma is just one example. It's fairly well known for releasing ghosts. Actually, the physics is as follows. At the time of death, there is a partially centripetal longitudinal node, call it your soul, the coherence of your aura. And it has to reach a critical mass of centripetal force, literally density, in order to couple and embed in the array called communion of saints, ancestor memory, many names for the same thing, Champs-Élysées. So to embed in that array, we have to reach a critical mass of centripetal inertia, which is why death needs to be sacred and still and implosive and organized and well planned to enable that implosion to work. Otherwise, that ghost is literally unable to embed and be distributed in that array. And that's what a stuck ghost is as living plasma. Now, anything that provides a very powerful plasma vortex could be capable of releasing that ghost. For example, a human who has access to bliss and understands astral hygiene well enough to be a vehicle for the translation of those ghosts without getting stuck with all that pain. And that's a very detailed lesson in astral hygiene. And the best way to teach that is electrical engineering, in my view.
Amazing. We obviously are giving, your perspective, your knowledge, and you're right. If we can learn to separate, some people are so stuck in the spirituality or the religion, they don't understand the science. They then tell themselves, I'm not smart enough, which is a lie. We are all perfectly clever enough to understand the energy frequencies and subjects that you are speaking to, even if you have to listen a few times and re-educate ourselves into not thinking we're 3 years old, accepting that adults we are now, right? So we can make sense of this vessel, this energy frequency, this coherence that we're in. Wow, Dan, I could just go on and on. I wrote notes on Dan Willis, who's going to be performing frill energy using Vogel crystals and other instrumentation. You mentioned the piezoelectricity, which again, if people don't know where that is located, we are told that piezoelectricity is the most powerful in the pineal gland, in our own pineal gland. And you mentioned an experiment connecting to the bone. Right, go ahead, please.
Well, the quartz crystal is piezo in the sense that it will couple the mechanical stricture to a voltage on a perpendicular axis, the only definition of piezo. The nature of quartz, SiO2, for example, is that it's only hex and will only produce octave harmonics, literally powers of 2, and therefore never produce anything longitudinal unless the externally applied phase conjugate pump wave human bliss can then pump out a longitudinal wave and make it scalar and healing. The pineal, much on the other hand, is a naturally pent implosive piezo, and the foci of the phonon waves that arrive from the sacrocranial pump out the amygdala, the only real physics of Kundalini. And so then you have these ventricle horns, they rotate the phonon, and we know how to identify the ringing in the ears heard by meditators, sangreal, and we know why that's the voice of ancestors. And that focuses an implosive phonon array on the pineal, which in my case will burn like intense, and as the crown, and then you have a powerful negative ion beam out the top of the head. And this is advanced physics of Kundalini 101, what is converging as a phonon at the pineal. And that is all at goldenmean.info/Kundalini. But you're right. Then that phonon wave imploding at the pineal dumps out a massive longitudinal. And that is the physics of clairvoyance for sure. It's literally the third eye. Literally the third eye, yes. And access to Kundalini is the mechanism.
It's so beautiful. I really want to get deeper into the Kundalini, connecting to the piezo, connecting to the spiritual terms of third eye, but not today, because I feel that I don't want to rush that. And I know that people that watch this conversation are just going to be so thrilled to learn more about Dan Winter and how he thinks and what he delivers. And I'm sure you'd be open to a second conversation with me where we can express and explain your physical trainings and experiences in Kundalini energy coming up, the piezo, the third eye, etc., and beyond. What do you think?
Yeah, it feels like inhabiting a lightning bolt, actually. 30 years in my case. The documentary film and all of the wave mechanics, we published goldenmean.info/Kundalini, which would be a good intro. But of course, I'm happy to. I mean, notably, that spine liquid pump, those titles of the spine liquid pump, Upledger, if your spine liquid pump is pumping, it's clinically impossible to be depressed. That is an infrasound cascade, all golden ratio to Planck, motorized by heart rate variability and the breath. And that does deliver that burning radiance, the ringing of the ears, and it's called the draining of the ventricle horns. It's actually the physics of what you mean when you said horny. It actually, your ventricle horns do crystallize with that phonon coherence, which is conserved sexual energy. And that might be a good place to start the conversation. Conserve sexual energy, question mark?
Okay, that sounds great. All right, well, we'll book, and we'll definitely, and I also wanted to talk about some of your inventions with your company Therify, which are, in my opinion, just mind-blowing. Just mind-bloody blowing, Mr. Dan Winter, you genius.
Well, we think, people talk about medbed, and therify.net is also published as plasmamedbed.com. But medbed referred essentially to the ability to deliver time reversal, which in stem cell physics is called dedifferentiation, which is how the cell gets back to the root of the stem of the fractal. And that time reversal in physics is defined by phase conjugation, which is what we perfected in therify.net. We feed that phase conjugate pump wave at 500,000 volts through a Tesla coil to the noble gases, like Puharich did, and we're successful in 25 countries. You can read all about it at therify.net. And the same infrasound cascade, by the way, is what drives flameinmind.com, which is our brainwave tech. And the same cascade is what drives theimploder.com, which is our water tech. So it's all about implosion. And of course, I'm happy to chat about that at any time, not just for commercial reasons, because the pure principle is fun.
It is, and the more people come to understand that this is something they can also access for themselves, you know, the things they've thought about. It's so amazing, you know, there's somebody will sit and watch you and they will listen to you and they'll go, oh my God, I knew it. I always thought that. Or I was taught this and I believe this. And then my teacher or my lover or my boring, influential, controlling handler said this. And so it's just so lovely because conversations like this, I know, validate the viewer, the observer. And more than that, not just the listening, auditory, or the verbal, you know, physical, using the voice box, but within them, their own cellular memory, the energetic frequencies they're inhabiting from whatever timeline, it has an opportunity to open in a different way, for them to have more respect for themselves and go, I bloody knew it. I bloody well knew that.
And real access to your own bliss process. Remember, fundamentally, until you have your own source of bliss, that's the beginning of your own source of charge, which means until then, you are electrically a parasite by definition. So you must locate your own source of bliss. Starts with Castaneda, source of power, you know, follow your bliss. Well, you know, bliss is the charge radiance that follows implosive charge compression. That's the point. And my second book, Conscious Kids, Golden Mean Dead Emphasis Conscious Kids, you can see all 5 at planckfire.com. But my second book is a description of the hygiene for bliss for young peoples called Implosion, Secret Science of Ecstasy and Immortality.
Very, very, very important work indeed. Well, I'll make sure that all of your links are underneath, guys. It's always just underneath the video. Oh, people can see information. It's always underneath the video. Just go there. So I'll put all of your details there. And I just want to come to you for your final words for this particular broadcast today. Sir Dan Winter, please.
Well, remember, don't let anybody tell you it's complicated. You know, fractality is not complicated. It looks like a rose. You make a magnetic map of your mind, your bed, your garden, and your village. Rearrange everyone to look like a rose, and then you're done. Because that's where, you know, Prague, the magnetic map is a rose, and I could lucid dream there. You know, that's centripetal force, and that's the origin. That's the origin of your own bliss. So when you go inside and you visualize a rose, as the Steiner kids do, and the room fills with the smell of roses, you've passed the test.
Oh my God. Genius, genius, genius. Dan Winter, thank you. It's been so much bloody fun. This is just so great. I'm so excited. I can't wait for our second conversation. Already, Dan Winter, already.
We had fun, Dani.
Oh my God. Totally.
Happy to be with you. Thank you.
Oh, me too. Me too. And to you guys out there, don't even tell me you haven't had fun, because you have. And don't pretend I don't understand. Just go back, listen again, go back, listen again, you know, make some notes, make it physical, make it come up and out, because you have the right to observe and listen to what Dan Winters has studied his whole lifetime and learned from other great people who put information out into the field, as we're all bringing our own stories back together right now. No one above another. No one above another. We are all bloody brilliant, all of us, no exceptions.
And perfect relaxation. Right. Perfect relaxation is fractal. It looks like a rose.
There you go. There you go. And along with some Chopin.
Also looks like a rose. Thank you. Blessings.
Brilliant. Well,
see you again.
Totally. Definitely. And to you guys out there, my name is Dani Henderson. I will see you soon, and I send you lots of love. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Until next